Hello, my YouTube family, especially the night owls, and my younger listeners, welcome back to Crime Whispers. I know a lot of you use these videos to unwind and drift off to sleep, and I'm here to help with that tonight. Before we dive into today's case, go ahead and like this video, and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me continue bringing you these stories every day. Now, tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it over there? Get comfortable, relax, and let's begin. Case 1. David and Kimberly Cam. This is the story of David and Kimberly Cam. Both David and Kim grew up in the same town, New Albany, Indiana. They first crossed paths in the mid-1980s, and by 1989, Kim had become David's second wife. Things seemed to be going well. That same year, David was accepted into the Indiana State Police and later became part of the Emergency Response Unit. Fast forward to 1993, the couple welcomed their first child together, a son named Bradley. It was Kim's first child, though David already had a daughter from a previous marriage. The family appeared to be thriving, but in 1994, during Kim's second pregnancy, cracks began to show. David began an affair with a younger woman named Stephanie McCarty, whom he'd met at the gym. At a time when Kim needed the most support, David moved out and into his mistress's home. Kim was devastated and leaned heavily on her family. Despite the pain, both families continued to support her. When baby Jillian was born on February 28, 1995, everyone showed up, everyone except David. By March, the affair had ended, and David wanted to reconcile. Kim, still deeply hurt, considered giving him another chance for the sake of their children and the life they had built. Surprisingly, David moved back in, and Kim's decision was backed by her family. The couple even began building a new home together on Lockhart Road in Georgetown, Indiana, road named after David's maternal relatives. It felt like a fresh start. For a while, it seemed like things were improving. But David's old habits returned. Known for being flirtatious, he resumed casual affairs, using his patrol car for meets. Then came a lawsuit. David and two fellow troopers were accused of assaulting a 19-year-old during an arrest. More complaints followed, and David's career spiraled downward. After a demotion, he resigned and took a job in his uncle's waterproofing business, where he quickly earned more money and had more time at home. By the year 2000, the Cams seemed to be doing well. Bradley, now 7, was in second grade. Jill, age 5, had started kindergarten. Kim worked as a senior accountant in Louisville. Life looked picture perfect from the outside, but behind the scenes, Kim still had suspicions. She confided in a close friend that she believed David was cheating again. Then came the night. Everything changed. September 28, 2000. It was a Thursday. David went to play basketball at the local church rec center, while Kim took the kids to their usual activities. It was a typical evening, but by the time David got home, everything had changed. As he pulled into the driveway and opened the garage door, a horrifying sight greeted him. Kim was lying on the garage floor, a gunshot wound to her head, a pool of blood beneath her. The passenger door of her black Ford Bronco was wide open. David rushed over and looked inside. Inside the vehicle were their two children, Jill and Bradley, both appearing to have been shot as well. David's police training kicked in. Kim and Jill were clearly gone, but he thought Bradley might still be alive. There was no visible head injury, and the boy's body still felt warm. David climbed in, maneuvered through the front seats, and gently lifted his son out, placing him on the garage floor and beginning CPR. During the process, David's knee pressed into the car's back seat, causing Jill's body to slump forward, touching his t-shirt and leaving behind her blood. This contact would become a crucial point in the investigation, intertwining David's DNA with the crime scene. When CPR failed, David called the Indiana State Police, his former colleagues, and ran to his uncle's house across the street, shouting for help. Then, he returned to the garage, overwhelmed with panic. police soon arrived. Kim lay, as described, on the garage floor, pants removed, blood trailing from her head. Nearby lay Bradley's body, and Jill was still slumped in the Bronco's back seat. Investigators initially considered robbery, but there were no signs of forced entry. Nothing stolen, and no damage to the home. The scene felt personal. In the garage, they found a sweatshirt with the word backbone written inside the collar, tucked under Bradley's body. No one recognized it, not even David. They also discovered bleach nearby, and unexplained fingerprints on the outside of Kim's vehicle. But since she parked in public areas daily for work, the prints didn't raise immediate alarms. David was cooperative. He laid out a full timeline, saying Kim and the kids likely got home between 7:30 and 7:40 p.m. based on the state of the car. He believed the murders happened just after they arrived. He claimed he was playing basketball from 7 o'clock to 9:20 p.m. and had no idea who would target his family. But the investigation took a turn when phone records showed a call made from David's homeland, Lynette, exactly 7:19 p.m. That one call shattered his alibi. David had insisted he wasn't home during that time, but the landline call said otherwise. And then came the autopsy results case. David and Kimberly Cam. The autopsy confirmed that all three victims, Kim, Bradley, and Jill, had died from gunshot wounds. But there was something else. Something deeply disturbing. The medical examiner found evidence of blunt force trauma to Jill's genital area, an injury that appeared to have occurred within 24 hours of her death. While it could have been the result of a fall, the possibility of sexual assault couldn't be ruled out. Strangely, just days earlier, little Jill had told her dance teacher that she was in pain. She'd even cried during class. Whether this discomfort was linked to the trauma found during her autopsy was unclear, but it left investigators and those close to the family chilled. And then there was Kim's haunting final conversation. Before the murders, Kim had confided in a close friend, saying, "History is repeating itself." She didn't explain what she meant, but her friend, concerned, suggested Kim take the kids to Florida to visit and talk more in person. Kim agreed it might help, but that trip never happened. Whatever Kim had been hinting at died with her. Was she referring to David's history of infidelity? Or was it something darker? Something tied to her children? We'll likely never know. Further findings only deepened the mystery. Kim had bruises and cuts on the tops of her feet, and oddly, her shoes were found placed neatly on top of her car, in a scene otherwise full of chaos. No one could explain why. Not even the police. As days passed, suspicions around David Cam began to intensify. Even Kim's mother grew deeply suspicious. She believed that her granddaughter, Jill, a bold, spirited little girl, would never have stayed quiet if a stranger had harmed her. The only person who might have been able to silence her was David. 3 days later, on a Sunday, the town was still buzzing with rumors. No arrests had been made yet, and tension was high. But David did something unexpected. He went to church with his parents, just as he always did. The church service, led by David's uncle, a pastor, was deeply emotional. David cried through the service, showing what appeared to be raw grief. But outside the church, reporters swarmed him, and for many in the community, his public behavior didn't sit right. His controlled demeanor, his apparent lack of anguish, it all raised questions. Could David have been capable of murdering his wife and children? Later that very afternoon, David voluntarily walked into the police station for questioning, but this time, the tone shifted. Things became tense. Investigators pressed hard after that interview. They arrested him. The arrest boiled down to two key pieces of evidence. The 7:19 p.m. phone call made from David's home, contradicting his claim that he was at the church rec center playing basketball. Between 7 o'clock and 9:20 p.m., the blood on his shirt, a spatter pattern that, according to prosecutors, could only have come from close-range gunfire. That was enough. David was taken into custody, But the arrest affected more than just him. In the small, tight-knit town of Georgetown where everyone knows everyone, the Cam family became instant pariahs. Their phone rang with hateful voicemails. Strangers shot glares at them in public. Some even started referring to them as a pack of wolves. David's grandfather, a respected church elder, watched helplessly as the church he helped build was forced to close its doors. People wanted nothing to do with the Cam name. Then came March 2002. Trial time. The prosecution came out swinging. Their theory: David was so tired of his marriage, so entangled in extramarital affairs, that instead of divorcing Kim, he chose to kill her and their children. To support this narrative, they brought in around a dozen women, many of whom testified that David had pursued them or had affairs while married. The picture they painted was clear: a man who had no respect for his wife or his family. The evidence: they focused hard on two things: the blood spatter and that 7:19 p.m. phone call. But the defense had a different story. They claimed that the blood on David's shirt came from Jill's hair, brushing against him while he attempted CPR on Bradley. To prove it, they even conducted a live demonstration in court, using wigs and fake blood to recreate the same transfer pattern. As for the phone call, they blamed Indiana's confusing time zone boundaries. They argued that the call log didn't account for the 1-hour difference between Eastern and Central Time. With that adjustment, the call could have been made before David left for basketball, and there was his alibi. Every single one of the 11 men David played with testified under oath that he was at the gym the entire time, never left. Despite all this, the jury wasn't convinced. David Cam was found guilty, 3 counts of murder and 1 of conspiracy. He was sentenced to 195 years in prison. It seemed like justice had been served, but that wasn't the end. David filed an appeal. He argued that the court never should have allowed details about his affairs to be presented. They had nothing to do with the actual murders. And in 2004, a judge agreed. David's conviction was overturned. The case was thrust back into the spotlight. A second trial was set for January 2006, but before that could happen, something happened that would change everything. In early 2005, the defense filed a motion to retest DNA found on the mysterious sweatshirt found under Bradley's body, the one with the word backbone written inside the collar. This time, they wanted to run the unknown DNA profiles through CODES, the National DNA Database. Until now, prosecutors had refused, claiming the samples had already been tested and no matches were found. But under court order, they were forced to comply. When the results came back, they were explosive. One of the unknown profiles matched a convicted felon, Charles Boney. Boney had a long and violent criminal history. He was from nearby New Albany and had recently been released on parole after serving time for a string of armed attacks on women. Several of his victims reported disturbing phone calls in the weeks leading up to the assaults. Calls where a man asked them what shoes they wore. Boney had a well-known foot fetish and often stole women's shoes during his crimes. One of his more recent convictions involved an attempted abduction at gunpoint. The similarities to the Cam case were hard to ignore. The most chilling detail: Kim's shoes had been carefully placed on top of her car, and her feet showed signs of trauma cuts, bruises, and abrasions. In a crime scene that otherwise screamed chaos, this felt calculated. It was too similar to Boney's prior behavior to ignore. With this revelation, Boney was finally brought in for questioning, and what he said next would send shockwaves through the entire case. The David Cam case, Part 3, after Charles Boney was brought in for questioning, he agreed to take a polygraph test. The results suggested he was being deceptive. Still, Charles denied any involvement in the murders. He claimed he had donated the gray sweatshirt found under Bradley's body to charity long ago. But just 2 weeks later, investigators made a breakthrough. Charles Boney's palm print was discovered on Kim's vehicle, directly linking him to the crime scene. He was arrested, but not simply for being present. Police charged him with conspiring with David Cam to carry out the murders. Soon after, Charles provided a 5-page written confession explaining how he knew David. According to Charles, the two had first met at a pickup basketball game in New Albany. Their paths crossed again at a local meat shop, where David allegedly asked him for a favor, to purchase an untraceable gun for $250. Charles agreed and delivered the weapon, claiming he wrapped it in a gray sweatshirt to prevent oil leakage, which may explain how his palm print ended up on Kim's SUV. But as detectives questioned him further, Charles's story began to shift. Now, he painted a far more sinister picture, accusing David of being a violent man who was abusing his daughter, Jill, and cheating on his wife. According to Charles, Kim discovered the abuse, and David snapped. Fearing exposure, David allegedly decided to kill his entire family to cover up his secrets. Charles claimed that he followed David to the house that night and waited outside. He said he heard a loud argument coming from inside, followed by gunshots. In a particularly haunting moment, Charles recounted hearing young Bradley scream out, "Daddy, Daddy," before a final shot rang out. Then, Charles claimed David emerged from the house aiming the gun at him, as if intending to kill him too. Charles said he ran into the garage to hide and, in his panic, moved Kim's shoes, a detail that eerily matched the crime scene. Moments later, he heard a vehicle pulling into the driveway and fled. He insisted he never pulled the trigger, only sold the gun, and didn't report the crime because he feared being blamed, especially, as he put it, as a black man. His statement led to formal charges: conspiracy to commit murder. He was held in jail, awaiting trial. It later came out that Charles had already spoken with prosecutor Stan Faith during David's first trial before ever being considered a suspect. Charles admitted they knew each other well. Stan would later express deep regret over this connection. More evidence soon emerged. DNA from Charles's ex-girlfriend, Mala, was also found on the sweatshirt. At the time of the murders, the two were dating, though their relationship ended not long after. Mala described that on the night of the murders, Charles told her he was heading to work, but he returned home around midnight with scraped knees. Then, he did something she'd never seen before. He showed her a gun. The next morning, Charles was watching news coverage of the Cam murders with his mother. Mala, disturbed by everything, left that day and wouldn't see him again for weeks. They eventually broke up. Her blood on the sweatshirt was later explained. She was diabetic and frequently pricked her fingers for blood sugar testing. Still, Mala's testimony cast more doubt on Charles's version of events. He had claimed to have left the gun behind at the scene, but Mala said she saw it after the murders. Had he gone back to retrieve it? It was enough to make investigators wonder, was Charles more involved than he claimed? Ultimately, both men were charged in connection with the killings. While in jail, Charles began writing his own autobiography, titled Backbone. In it, he openly admitted to selling the gun to David and described his role in the crime. He even claimed that David promised him Kim's life insurance money in return. Between his writings, confessions, and Mala's testimony, the case against Charles Boney solidified. In 2005, Charles was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and sentenced to 225 years in prison as a habitual offender. But what about David? David Cam's second trial, January 17, 2006. The reason David was granted a new trial in the first place was due to prosecutorial misconduct. Specifically, the judge ruled that his numerous affairs had been unfairly used to sway the jury. This time, that angle was off. The courtroom was strictly barred from mentioning infidelity, so prosecutors came back with a shocking new theory. David had been sexually abusing his daughter Jill, and when Kim found out, he murdered the entire family to silence them. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. The allegations were deeply disturbing and far more serious than anything previously alleged, but David's defense team quickly challenged the claim. They brought in a highly respected forensic pathologist who had reviewed Jill's autopsy. According to the expert, there was no physical evidence of sexual abuse. Specifically, no damage to her hymen, which would be expected in certain types of abuse. Yes, Jill had suffered blunt force trauma to the pelvic region, but the expert explained these were consistent with the violent nature of the murders, and not necessarily sexual in nature. That said, the prosecution argued that not all forms of abuse leave visible evidence, especially when conducted in secret or through non-invasive means. Still, the defense claimed the prosecution was stretching the facts to support a theory that didn't hold up under scrutiny. Their argument was simple. There was no proof of sexual abuse, and therefore, no motive tied to it. In the background of this battle was Charles Boney himself, whose new testimony continued to shape the case. Charles claimed David had planned the murders in advance, and that the gun was never stolen, it was purchased directly from him. But the defense pushed back hard, insisting that the entire case was built on lies, inconsistencies, and unreliable witnesses. They said the state's case wasn't solid enough to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. After weeks of intense testimony, on March 1, 2006, the jury returned their verdict: guilty. David was convicted once again for the murders of Kim, Jill, and Bradley Cam. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But David Cam wasn't done fighting. He filed another appeal, this time arguing that the allegations of child sexual abuse had prejudiced the jury, despite being unsupported by evidence. He maintained that he had never harmed his daughter in any way and that the claims were false and damaging. In a stunning development, the Indiana Supreme Court agreed. They overturned his conviction again. The court ruled that there was no competent evidence to support the abuse allegations. The jury should never have heard them. Imagine what this meant for Kim's family, for her father, Frank Wren. He had now endured multiple trials, multiple appeals, and multiple overturns, all while grieving the unimaginable loss of his daughter and 2 grandchildren. Frank later said, "I was kind of surprised by the overturn of the last verdict. All we want is the truth. And the truth is that David's guilty," he said, his voice laced with frustration. Kim's family had grown weary of the endless court proceedings. They were desperate to see David locked away for good, of the delays, tired of the doubt, and determined to get justice. Fast forward nearly 13 years, and David's third trial finally began in August 2013. But this time, the prosecution shifted strategies. Instead of focusing on old theories, they zeroed in on a life insurance policy David had taken out on Kim before her death. According to Charles, David's motive was simple: money, and he wasn't going to let anything or anyone stand in his way. Interestingly, that life insurance policy had been increased not long before Kim was killed, and the documents showed that Kim herself had signed off on the changes. So she was aware of it and had approved it. Charles returned to the stand once again, delivering yet another bombshell testimony. He claimed that David had manipulated him into being present at the house the night of the murders. Even more shockingly, he said David nearly turned the gun on him before Charles managed to escape. According to Charles, David carried out all the killings himself. Charles said he never laid a hand on Kim, Jill, or Brad. But David's defense team came prepared. They presented new DNA evidence this time, even more compelling than before. They revealed that Charles's DNA had been found on Kim's underwear, as well as on both Jill's and Kim's clothing. Perhaps most damning of all, Charles's DNA was discovered under Kim's fingernails, suggesting that she had fought for her life. Still, the most direct piece of evidence tying David to the crime scene was the blood spatter found on his shirt. Prosecutors claimed the blood belonged to the victims, but David's legal team offered a plausible explanation. David had tried to help Brad after he was shot. In the process, he'd brushed against Brad's bloodied head, causing the stains on his shirt. After weeks of tense courtroom drama, The jury reached a verdict on October 24, 2013, not guilty on all charges. David was overcome with emotion. He wept openly, thanking the jury and his attorneys for believing in his innocence. It was a monumental moment. Finally, after more than a decade of legal battles, David was a free man. But not everyone was celebrating. The community was split. 13 years of media coverage had created a cloud of suspicion that still lingered. Even with the acquittal, many questioned whether David had truly been innocent. The evidence was strong, but so were the doubts. Despite the controversy, David chose to remain in the same town. He returned to work at his uncle's business and began piecing his life back together. But the damage was done. His family was gone. His name had been dragged through the mud, and the emotional toll was immeasurable. Determined to hold someone accountable, David filed a civil lawsuit against several members of the prosecution team. You can't just destroy a man's life, steal his reputation, take away his freedom and walk away from it. That's not how justice is supposed to work, he said. Eventually, he received a settlement of over $5 million. A portion of it went to repay the friends and family who had stood by him through his long, grueling battle. Today, David is still working to rebuild what was lost. Though he's tried to move on, the scars remain. Since his acquittal, he's stayed in touch with some of the jurors who helped free him. In an inspiring twist, he was hired by the Innocence Project as a case coordinator, an organization dedicated to helping wrongfully convicted individuals, just like he once was. Meanwhile, Charles, the man whose testimony was central to all 3 trials, still insists he's innocent. He claims to have found religion and now calls himself a devout Christian. In several interviews, he's told multiple versions of what happened that night. But one detail hasn't changed. He says David was the one who pulled the trigger. According to him, he brought an untraceable weapon to the Cam residence, heard yelling, then gunfire, and saw David committing the murders. Why Charles did what he did remains a mystery. Was it greed? Jealousy? Something deeper and darker? Many questions still hang in the air, while some continue to believe David was involved. The evidence simply wasn't enough to convict. Case 2. The Eastburn family murders. It all started at a softball game in the 1970s, an ordinary day that changed Katie's life forever. That's where she met Gary Eastburn, a young man who quickly won her heart. Their connection was instant. By 1975, the couple married, and soon Gary enlisted in the U.S. Air Force, setting the course for their future. Their family grew fast. In 1979, their first daughter, Kara, was born. Aaron followed in 1981, and in 1983, their third daughter, Jana, completed the Eastburn family. Gary's military career flourished. By the time Jana was born, he had achieved the rank of captain, and they had settled into a comfortable life in Fayetteville, North Carolina, near Pope Air Force Base. But in 1985, everything changed. Gary received new orders. He was to be stationed in England, a significant step forward in his career. But first, he had to complete a 10-week officer training course at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. That meant Katie would be left behind to manage their affairs, care for the children, and prepare for the family's international move. Katie faced all the stress of a military move alone, handling paperwork, securing the home, organizing the logistics, and finding a new home for the family dog, Dixie, because pets weren't allowed to accompany them to England. Katie made the heartbreaking decision to give Dixie up. She placed an ad hoping to find a loving home for their beloved pet. She had no idea that the man who would answer that ad would soon become the center of one of the most horrific crimes in North Carolina history. While Gary focused on his training in Alabama, Katie shouldered everything back home. The family was set to reunite in England, but for now, it was just Katie and the girls in Fayetteville. And then came the knock on the door. The man who wanted to adopt Dixie. It seemed like a simple exchange, but it would lead to a chain of events so horrifying that the Eastburns' lives would never be the same. Their lives were busy, and his career had always come first. The family had adapted to the rhythm and sacrifices of military life. Gary's recent promotion to captain had brought them to Fayetteville, and now an overseas assignment in England was just around the corner, a major step in his military career. Katie supported her husband's ambitions, even as it became clear that their family life was on the brink of unexpected change. That's when she met Timothy Hennis. Hennis, a sergeant stationed nearby, lived in the same area with his wife, Angela, and their young daughter, Christina. Like many young servicemen, Hennis was trying to balance his military responsibilities with the demands of family life. Everything about his world seemed ordinary until he answered a newspaper ad Katie had placed about rehoming their dog, Dixie. On May 7, 1985, Hennis visited the Eastburn home. Katie welcomed him in and introduced him to Dixie. He explained that he and Angela were dog lovers, but their current pet, Snowball, a mixed breed, hadn't adjusted well to their baby daughter. The dog had grown jealous, and they needed a more child-friendly pet. Dixie seemed to be a perfect match. Before leaving, Hennis politely asked to use the restroom. Katie agreed. After that brief visit, he left with Dixie, and Katie had no reason to think twice about the man she had just met. She couldn't have known it would be one of the final peaceful days of her life. To Katie, Hennis was just another man rehoming a dog. But that simple transaction set into motion a devastating chain of events. On the evening of May 9, 1985, everything at the Eastburn household appeared normal. Katie spent the day caring for her 3 young daughters, Kara, Erin, and Jana. But by the morning of May 10th, their lives had been shattered. Katie, Erin, and Kara were found brutally murdered inside their home. Katie had been sexually assaulted and suffered multiple stab wounds. Erin and Kara, just 3 and 5 years old, had also been stabbed to death. At first glance, the crime scene didn't suggest a break-in. The front door was locked, yet a pile of newspapers had accumulated outside, suggesting that no one had left the house for days. By the evening of May 10th, Gary began to worry. Katie hadn't called him from North Carolina, as she usually did, and he was training in Alabama at the time. He contacted the Fayetteville Police Department. Officers checked on the home the following day, but with no clear signs of foul play. They left a note asking Katie to call. What they didn't realize was that Katie and her daughters had already been murdered. On Sunday, May 12th, their neighbor, Army Sergeant Bob Seafelt, returned home and found his wife uneasy. She'd bailed out a drunk soldier the night before, and noticed newspapers piling up at the Eastburns' door. Their car was still parked in the driveway. The stroller was left by the back door. Something felt off. That's when Bob decided to check on the family. As he approached the house, he heard what he thought was a baby crying. He knocked, rang the doorbell, no response. He called the Eastburns' babysitter, Julie Chernick, who arrived shortly after. Looking through the window, Julie saw baby Jana, alone in her crib, filthy and crying. Her instinct was to break into the home, but Bob asked her to wait for the police. Officer William Chewin was the first to arrive. He forced open a window, retrieved Jana along with a few diapers, and handed her over to Bob before moving deeper into the house. What he discovered was horrifying. Katie and her 3-year-old daughter Erin were found lifeless, victims of a vicious attack. A deeper search revealed 5-year-old Kara dead in her bed. The scene was brutal, catty, and both girls had their throats slit. Miraculously, 22-month-old Jana had survived. Left alone in her crib for 3 agonizing days, dehydrated and covered in waste. Why would anyone murder a young mother and her children? The investigation, especially with the family's military background, escalated quickly. Detectives Robert Biddle and Jack Watts from the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office were assigned to the case. They combed through the Eastburn home for evidence. Fingerprints and hair samples were collected, A luminol test revealed signs of a cleanup attempt. Blood had been wiped from walls and surfaces, but traces remained. Gary told investigators that Katie's ATM card was missing, along with $300 in cash and a slip of paper with her ATM pin written on it. Then came the first significant break. Patrick Cohn, a local janitor, approached the detectives with a tip. He said he'd seen a tall white man wearing jeans and a black members-only jacket walking down the Eastburns driveway in the early morning hours of May 10th. The man was carrying a garbage bag. Patrick also remembered seeing a white Chevrolet nearby. His description helped narrow the timeline of the murders between 8 p.m. on May 9th and 3rd, 0 a.m. on May 10th. Patrick had been walking home from his girlfriend's house at around 3:30 a.m. when he passed the Eastburn home. As the man walked by, he casually said, "Getting an early start this morning," then got into the white Chevette and drove away. Patrick described the man as roughly 6'4", with blonde hair sticking out from underneath a black knit cap. With this critical lead, police turned to the media. They issued a public appeal on television and radio, asking the man who had adopted the Eastburns dog to come forward. What had started with a dog adoption ad was now the focus of a full-scale murder investigation, and Timothy Hennis, the man who had taken Dixie, would soon become the center of it all. A composite sketch was created based on Patrick's description of the man he saw leaving the Eastburn residence. Despite the early leads, the investigation quickly stalled as law enforcement struggled to gather more conclusive information. But the case took a turn when investigators discovered that Tim Hennis had recently interacted with the Eastburn family, making him a person of interest. The case gained widespread media attention. On May 15th, Hennis voluntarily walked into the Fayetteville Police Department and submitted to questioning by detectives Biddle and Watts. His account was straightforward. He claimed he had visited the Eastburns on May 7th to adopt their family dog, Dixie. After that, he said he only spoke to Katie once, on the phone, on May 9th, just to check on the dog. According to him, he then drove his wife and daughter to her parents' house and returned home, stopping only to refuel his car. But his alibi would soon begin to unravel. Though Hennis and his wife initially believed they had fully cooperated, investigators took more than just his statement. They collected blood, saliva, hair, fingerprints, and palm prints. A photo lineup later led to a significant moment when young Patrick pointed to Hennis as the man he saw near the Eastburn home. Things became even more complicated when it was discovered that Katie's stolen ATM card had been used late on May 10th, and again on the morning of May 11th. The amount withdrawn totaled $300, the same amount missing from Katie's wallet. Investigators were already aware of Hennis's financial struggles, including a history of bounced checks and overdue rent. Then came a new lead. A witness described seeing a blond man resembling Hennis at the ATM around the same time of the withdrawals. Suspicion deepened when it was revealed that Hennis's landlord received a $300 rent payment shortly after the murders. By May 1985, Hennis had become the prime suspect, and authorities began monitoring him closely. Still, no physical evidence had definitively tied him to the crime. Everything was circumstantial. Then more inconsistencies started surfacing. Hennis had claimed to be at his in-laws that night, but his former girlfriend, Nancy Mazer, came forward saying he had unexpectedly visited her that same evening. He also brought a black members-only jacket to a dry cleaner on May 10th. A jacket that resembled the one seen by witnesses near the crime scene. Neighbors even reported seeing Hennis burning items in a barrel the morning after the murders. Eventually, police returned to Hennis's home with an arrest warrant. He wasted no time hiring a powerhouse legal team: Beaver, Holt, Richardson, Stern, Berg, and Glazer, a firm known for its high-profile defense work. Jerry Beaver and Billy Richardson, among the top criminal defense lawyers in North Carolina, took the lead. They hired private investigator Bob Nicker to independently examine the case and search for missed clues. Despite his arrest on triple homicide and physical assault charges, the evidence against Hennis remained circumstantial, which meant the prosecution had to work harder to build a convincing case. His first trial began in 1986. Prosecutors argued that Hennis murdered the Eastburn family to cover up a sexual assault against Katie. Their case hinged largely on the timeline in Patrick's eyewitness account, identifying Hennis as the man carrying a trash bag from the home. The defense, however, came out swinging. They immediately challenged the reliability of the eyewitnesses. They staged a reenactment at 3:30 a.m., just like Patrick's account, but visibility was poor due to the heavy fog. Their point was clear. The child couldn't have seen anything that early in the morning. Investigator Nicker went deeper. Hair and fingerprint evidence recovered at the crime scene didn't match Hennis. The shoe prints left behind were too small to be his. Forensic experts even uncovered a condom wrapper under a dresser, something police had missed, which raised the possibility that another man, potentially Katie's husband, could have been involved. The neighbors, the Ratcliffes, said they didn't see anyone on the morning of the crime, but a few nights later, they noticed a man walking with a trash bag. He had blonde hair, wore a black beret, and a members-only jacket, matching Patrick's original description. Despite all the reasonable doubt raised, the case against Hennis pressed on. The jury was shown graphic crime scene photos that emphasized the brutality of the murders. The circumstantial evidence piled up, and the prosecution managed to sway the jury. On July 4, 1986, Tim Hennis was found guilty of 1 count of first-degree rape and 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to death, but Hennis wasn't finished fighting. Shortly after arriving at Central Prison in Raleigh, he received a bizarre postcard from someone calling themselves Mr. X, claiming responsibility for the murders. His defense team called it a prank, but they kept it in their records. Prosecutors received a similar postcard, but didn't take it seriously. The evidence against Hennis was, to them, overwhelming. Still, Hennis's attorneys worked tirelessly on his appeal, and in 1988, their efforts paid off. His conviction was overturned. The courts ruled that the trial had been unfair, and a retrial was ordered for February 27, 1989. This time, the prosecution came with new ammunition. A neighbor, Elisa Peabody, who had previously claimed to see nothing, now said she had seen Hennis leaving the Eastburn home. The defense, however, was prepared. They cross-examined every key witness, poking holes in their statements. Lucille Cook, the woman who had been at the ATM, initially told police she saw no one, but now, in court, she suddenly identified Hennis. The defense timed the ATM session and proved that Cook's revised account made little sense. Patrick, the original eyewitness, was also exposed. Under pressure, he admitted he'd once been charged with theft using a stolen ATM card, charges that had quietly disappeared. His friend, Sean Buckner, testified that Patrick had written a letter confessing he didn't actually recognize the man he saw that night. Then came the defense's bombshell witness, John Ralt. He had been seen near the Eastburn home at the time of the murders. He was 6'4", wore dark pants and a black members-only jacket, a near-perfect match to the figure Patrick described. It was enough. The jury found Hennis not guilty. He was acquitted in 1989 and walked free. For a time, many believed the justice system had failed the Eastburn family. But in 2007, new DNA testing changed everything. A sample recovered from Katie Eastburn's body, semen matched Tim Hennis, due to double jeopardy laws. North Carolina couldn't retry him, but Hennis was still an army man, now retired. So the military reactivated him and brought him before a court-martial. In this trial, Hennis admitted for the first time that he and Katie had slept together, but claimed it had been consensual. He said he hadn't revealed this earlier because he didn't want to hurt her husband, Gary Eastburn. The jury wasn't convinced. On April 9, 2010, Tim Hennis was found guilty on 3 counts of premeditated murder. In 2020, he was transferred to death row at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. His conviction and sentence were upheld. Case 3. The Otero Family Murders. January 15, 1974. It was a bitterly cold morning in Wichita, Kansas, when 15-year-old Charlie Otero walked home from school with 2 of his siblings, completely unaware that he was about to step into a nightmare that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The first sign that something was wrong was the family dog, Lucky, pacing anxiously outside in the cold. Lucky was never left outside alone. That wasn't right. As Charlie pushed open the back door and stepped inside, the house was quiet, too quiet. Then he saw his mother's purse flipped over on the stove, its contents scattered across the counter. His mom was meticulous. She never left things in disarray. "Is anybody home?" he called out. No answer. Then one of his siblings cried out from deeper in the house. "Charlie, come quick. Mom and Dad are playing a bad trick on us." But this was no prank. Charlie ran down the hallway, heart pounding in his chest, and that's when his world shattered. His father was lying motionless on the floor. His mother was tied up on the bed, lifeless, her body bruised and twisted. They didn't even look like themselves. His father's head was wrapped in plastic, a belt cinched tightly around his throat. His mother's face was frozen in pain, the rope that bound her cutting into her skin. He didn't even realize he was screaming until his throat burned. Charlie and his siblings fled to a neighbor's house, trembling as they called the police. "Something happened. They're not moving. We need help," Charlie sobbed into the phone. When the police arrived, time stopped making sense. Charlie waited outside, numb, while officers entered the home. That's when they found the bodies of his younger siblings, Joey and Josephine. Joey's body was discovered in a bedroom, but Josie, 11 years old, was nowhere in sight until they opened the basement door. The police wouldn't let Charlie see what they had found, and for that, he would later say he was grateful. Josephine had been hanged from a pipe, her small frame suspended in a horrifying final image that would come to define one of the most chilling crimes in American history. Charlie was taken to the police station. That's where they told him that Joey and Josie were also gone. He couldn't recall what he said, if he said anything at all. Later he would reflect, "I thank God every day that I didn't find them, because I don't know how I would have handled it. I don't know how Michael would have handled it either." Even in his days, one thing was clear: his entire family had been taken from him, and someone had done this. The man behind the horror was someone no one suspected. Dennis Rader was known as a polite, well-mannered man, a devoted husband, a father of 2, an active member of his church, a neighbor in good standing. But beneath the surface, he was a sadistic predator with a hunger for control, cruelty, and death. He would become known by a name that reflected his dark philosophy: BT combined, torture, kill. Dennis Lynn Rader was born in 1945 in Pittsburgh, Kansas, and grew up in Wichita. Even as a child, he harbored disturbing fantasies and reportedly enjoyed torturing animals. These urges never left him. After serving in the Air Force, Rader settled down. He married Paula in 1971, and the couple had 2 children. On the surface, he lived an ordinary life, but inside, the desire to kill grew stronger. And in January 1974, he acted on it. Rader had been stalking the Otero family for weeks. He had memorized their routines, studied the vulnerabilities of their home, and chosen his moment. On the morning of January 15th, he cut the phone lines and waited. 9-year-old Joey opened the back door to let the dog in. Rader slipped inside with a pistol and confronted the family. He told them he was a fugitive from California, just looking for food and a car. But that was a lie. His intentions were far more sinister. He forced the family into a bedroom and bound them with rope he'd brought. Joseph Otero Sr. tried to fight back, but Rader overpowered him, securing his limbs and covering his head with a plastic bag. When Joseph chewed through it, Raider placed a second bag over his head and watched as he slowly suffocated. Julie Otero pleaded for her son's life. "Please save my son," she begged. Raider pretended to show mercy, removing the bag only to strangle her moments later with a rope. Then came Joey. Raider placed a plastic bag over the young boy's head, then added 2 t-shirts and another bag to ensure he couldn't tear through it. He watched as the child gasped and thrashed in, till he finally went still. And Josie, she had seen everything. He led the 11-year-old to the basement. There, he tied a noose to a pipe and placed it around her neck. "Mama, Mama," she cried as he pulled the rope, her feet barely touching the ground. Her long hair got in his way as she struggled. Then she asked the question that still echoes decades later. "What's going to happen to me?" Raider replied coldly, "Well, honey, you're going to be in heaven tonight with the rest of your family." He hanged her, intentionally letting her toes graze the floor so she would die slowly. As her body went limp, Raider desecrated the scene in the most depraved way imaginable, tales too graphic to describe. He left the Otero home and disappeared into society, and for 3 decades, he remained hidden in plain sight. When Dennis Rader was finally arrested in 2005, the world learned how monstrous he truly was. In court, he recounted his crimes with a disturbing calmness. If he were describing a hobby, he admitted that he had never strangled anyone before and had to learn how much pressure to apply. He described training his grip with a squeeze ball. He told investigators how he disguised himself as a phone repairman to break into homes. He even mocked his victims' final words, repeating their pleas like punchlines. He had kept detailed journals and drawings of his crimes. Of Josie, he wrote, "My star, young maiden, that I will teach sex to." The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Family members wept. Charlie Otero, now a grown man, broke down sobbing when a photo of Josie hanging in the basement was shown. It was the same basement where he once played as a child. Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms. His final appeal was rejected by the Supreme Court in 2021, but no sentence could ever truly capture the horror of what he took from the Oteros and from so many others. Rader was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms. No chance of parole, no escape. Just a prison cell where he would rot for the rest of his miserable life. But for the families of his victims, that wasn't closure. Not truly. Carmen Dulio Otero Montoya. Though we've never met, you've seen my face. It's the same one you murdered over 30 years ago. The face of my mother, Julie Otero. I won't call you Mr. Rader. There is no respect in that name. Mr. is what you say to someone when you're asking for help, not when you're begging for your life. BTK is what you want it to be called. I won't give you that satisfaction. Raider is fitting a raider, a coward who ambushes, who steals, life without warning. Julie Otero wasn't just a victim. She was a mother who loved to laugh, to dance with her husband, to help people. Most of all, she loved her children. She taught her daughter how to love, how to be kind, how to face fear. I'm sure you saw that same strength in her face when she fought to live, when she fought you. And you with your gun, what were you? A coward? A demon? One victim's son once said. But the Otero family wasn't his only target. April 4th, 1974, Rader struck again. Catherine Bright, a 21-year-old from Wichita, had no idea a predator was watching her. He had stalked her, studied her schedule, and when she left home that day, he made his move, breaking in through the screen door. But this time, something interrupted his plan. Catherine wasn't alone. Her 19-year-old brother Kevin was also home. Rader pulled a gun, forced Kevin to tie up his sister, then took Catherine into another room. She fought hard, too hard. His typical method of strangulation failed. Frustrated, Rader stabbed her 3 times in the back and abdomen. She bled out. her body shuddering one last time before it went still. If I had brought my stuff and used my stuff, Kevin would probably be dead today. I'm not bragging. It's just a fact. Rader had tied Kevin up with cheap cords. He broke free. Catherine fought back too. It had gotten out of control. Rader tried to strangle Kevin, then shot him in the head. But Kevin didn't die. He played dead, then escaped when Rader fled. Unlike the Oteros, Kevin Bright survived and lived to tell the tale of the man who called himself BTK. March 17, 1977, Shirley Ruth Vienne Relfort, age 25, was home in Wichita. Rader had followed her 5-year-old son, watched where they lived. Once inside, he pulled a handgun. The fear was instant, suffocating. He tied up her 3 children and locked them in the bathroom. Then he led Shirley to her bedroom. She was so terrified, she vomited. But that didn't stop him. He tied her to the bed, plastic bag over her face, then the rope. As she choked and fought, her children pounded on the bathroom door, crying out for their mother. But Dennis Rader didn't care. He had already decided they were going to die too. But fate stepped in. The children managed to escape before he could kill them. He fled, leaving only Shirley's lifeless body as his trophy. And once again, Dennis Rader, polite neighbor, devoted churchgoer, family man, vanished into normal life, unsuspected. December 8, 1977, 25-year-old Nancy Jo Fox became his next victim. He had watched her for weeks. She lived alone, the perfect target. That night, he cut her phone lines and slipped into her house, hiding in the kitchen shadows. When Nancy walked in, she didn't have time to scream. He forced her to undress, bound her wrists and ankles, then strangled her with a belt, slowly, savoring every second. Before she died, he whispered a chilling confession. He had killed the Otero family. The next day, he called 911 from a payphone. "You will find a homicide at 843 South Pershing," he said, then hung up. February 10, 1978, Rader sent a letter to Wichita's TV station, Cake, claiming responsibility for the murders. He demanded a name in the newspaper, media coverage. "How many do I have to kill before I get attention?" The letter included a poem titled "Oh, Death to Nancy," a grotesque parody of a folk song. He called his motivation Factor X, a supernatural force. He claimed that also drove Jack the Ripper and the Son of Sam. In response, police flashed a subliminal message during a TV broadcast, "Now call the chief." It showed an image of upside-down glasses, a clue from the Fox crime scene. But it didn't work. Rader remained silent. 1979, his next target was 63-year-old Anna Williams. He broke into her home, waited 4 hours. But she never came home. His plan ruined. Rader left empty-handed, furious. Unknowingly, Anna had narrowly escaped death. Over time, his murders grew colder, more refined. 1985, 53-year-old Maureen Hedge was kidnapped, killed, and taken to the church where Rader was a council president. There, he posed and photographed her corpse before dumping it in a ditch. 1986, 28-year-old Vicky Wegerell was strangled in her home after Rader tricked her by posing as a phone repairman. 1991, 62-year-old Dolores Davis was strangled with pantyhose and dumped under a bridge. She was his last known victim. Then silence. For over a decade, nothing. By 2004, the BTK case had gone cold, until Rader couldn't resist. The urge for attention returned. Between March 2004 and February 2005, he sent 11 taunting messages to media and police, reawakening his sick game. In March 2004, the Wichita Eagle received a letter from someone calling himself Bill Thomas Killman, confessing to Vicky Wegerell's murder. Inside were photos of the crime scene and a copy of her stolen driver's license. DNA testing confirmed it. BTK was back. Police collected DNA from hundreds of men, but no match. Raider sent more letters, more packages, including one that held a doll, bound and suffocating inside a plastic bag. Just like Nancy Fox, in one message, he taunted investigators. They know nothing at all. I did it by myself, and with no one's help. I can't stop it. So the monster goes on. Good luck hunting. He signed it. Bind them, torture them, kill them. BTK. The downfall of BTK began with a box of cereal. In 2005, Dennis Rader left a cereal box in a Home Depot parking lot, a twisted reference to his self-given moniker, BTK. He hoped it would be discovered. When it wasn't, he mentioned it in a follow-up message. That mistake led investigators to surveillance footage, a man driving a black Jeep Cherokee. The vehicle was registered to Dennis Rader. Still, it wasn't enough. But Rader's arrogance would do the rest. In a message to police, he asked a seemingly simple question: can a floppy disk be traced? Through a classified ad, detectives replied via the Wichita Eagle, assuring him it was safe. Rader took the bait. He sent a purple floppy disk to a local news station. Within minutes, forensic analysts recovered metadata, file last modified by Dennis at Christ Lutheran Church. A quick search revealed the church's president, Dennis Rader. His black Jeep sat parked outside his home, exactly where police expected. Now they needed DNA. Investigators secretly obtained a pap smear sample from his daughter, taken at a Kansas State University clinic. The result: a familial DNA match to BTK crime scene evidence. Dennis Rader was finally arrested when officers approached him and said, "Mr. Rader, do you know why you're going downtown?" He responded without hesitation, "Oh, I have suspicions why." A search of his home, office, and church revealed damning evidence. Computer files, black pantyhose, and a strange cylindrical container. The next day, Wichita Police Chief Norman Williams faced the press. The bottom line: BTK is arrested. Following his arrest, Rader underwent a psychological evaluation with forensic psychologist Dr. Robert Mendoza. Mendoza diagnosed him with narcissistic, obsessive-compulsive, and antisocial personality disorders. Rader displayed a grandiose self-image, a need for admiration, strict control over routine, and a chilling lack of empathy. He believed he was special, untouchable, a genius who had outwitted the world. That same need for control appeared in court, where he coolly narrated each of his murders in excruciating detail, without a flicker of remorse. His taped interviews with Mendoza, originally meant for court use, were later aired on NBC's Dateline. The broadcast sparked outrage. The Kansas Attorney General sued Mendoza and his firm for breach of confidentiality. The case settled for $30,000. But the world had already seen the truth. Dennis Rader was a remorseless predator, entirely incapable of grasping the emotional devastation he had caused. On February 28, 2005, Dennis Rader was charged with 10 counts of first-degree murder. He initially pleaded not guilty, but on June 27th, he changed his plea to guilty, detailing each killing with disturbing pride. At his August 18th sentencing, he gave a rambling 30-minute apology. He later described it as an Academy Awards acceptance speech. He was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms, a minimum of 175 years in prison. Kansas had no death penalty at the time, as he was transported to El Dorado Correctional Facility. Rader chatted casually with officers about the weather, but when victim impact statements played over the radio, he began to cry. Today, he spends his life in solitary confinement, in a cell, far more humane than what he gave his victims. BTK's horrors inspired countless stories in books, films, television, and music. Stephen King based A Good Marriage on Rader's double life. Thomas Harris drew inspiration for Francis Dollarhide in Red Dragon. His story appeared in Law and Order, SVU, Criminal Minds, and Netflix's Catching Killers. Thrash metal band Exodus wrote the song BTK. Steven Wilson released the haunting track Raider 2, a chilling reflection of Raider's sadistic urges. But the story doesn't end there. August 2023. Investigators uncovered a chilling new possibility. BTK may have had more victims. While searching Raider's former Park City home, authorities found what appeared to be trophies linked to other unsolved disappearances, including that of 16-year-old Cindy Dawn Kinney, missing since June 23, 1976. Cindy was last seen at the Osage laundromat in Oklahoma. Witnesses recall a faded beige 1965 Plymouth pulling up. She was never seen again. Shortly after her disappearance, an anonymous male caller tipped off police, claiming she was in an old barn. That lead was never followed up, and her body was never found. Now, investigators are studying Raiders, journals, and drawings. One entry stands out. Bad wash day -1976. Raider wrote that he killed someone from a laundromat. He had been working as an ADT installer in the area the day Cindy disappeared. Among the sketches, bound girls in barns. The implication: Raider may have fantasized or acted on more than he ever admitted. Despite mounting circumstantial evidence, Raider denied involvement, possibly because Oklahoma enforces the death penalty. But the question now lingers. How many more victims of BTK are still waiting to be found? John Mello shared custody of his daughter, but in a dramatic turn of events, he unlawfully took her to Italy in an attempt to settle there permanently. Coincidentally, he returned to the United States on October 21st, just 2 days after Bradley Post's arrest. Upon landing, Mello was immediately arrested at the airport for custodial interference related to the unauthorized removal of his daughter from the country. Mello had long expressed concerns about his daughter's safety during visits with her mother, Christina Parcell. According to him, he had been aware for years that Christina and her partner Bradley Post were involved in the creation and distribution of child sexual abuse material, CSAM, with his daughter being a victim. In 2018, Mello says he reported this abuse multiple times to the Greenville County Sheriff's Office. However, the investigation was closed without any action. His claims dismissed as unsubstantiated. John and Christina had been in a relationship for several years before having their daughter in 2012. Their relationship deteriorated, and by 2015, Mello filed for custody. The following year, he was granted sole custody, though Christina retained visitation rights. In 2017, John attempted to revoke those rights, alleging abuse by Christina and Bradley. He presented evidence gathered by a private investigator, including claims that Christina was working as an escort and that this environment was harmful to their child. Despite these concerns, the court granted Christina expanded visitation in February 2019, allowing her to spend multiple days at a time with her daughter. But Mello had other intentions. He secretly fled to Italy with the child in late 2020. Christina eventually discovered their location through Mello's Facebook posts and, with Bradley's help, made several trips to Italy in pursuit of her daughter. She was ultimately successful in bringing her back to the US from April 2021 onward. The girl lived exclusively with Christina and her sister, Elena, due to Mello's illegal actions. It was expected he would lose custody entirely. When authorities searched Bradley Post's phone and various storage devices, they discovered years' worth of explicit material involving Christina's daughter, referred to as AM, as well as other minors, including one of AM's friends. It became painfully clear that John Mello had been right all along, yet his pleas for help had been ignored by both law enforcement and the family court system. Tragically, as soon as Christina returned from Italy, Bradley proposed to her. One can only imagine Mello's deep sense of helplessness, watching the mother of his child enable such horrific exploitation. So how did Christina meet Bradley Post? They first crossed paths over 20 years earlier at her father's cigar bar, but didn't begin dating until 2016, when Anne was just 4 years old, and Mello still held full custody. though John Mello had a strong motive to harm Christina. He had been out of the country when she was murdered. Investigators turned to surveillance footage, including Ring doorbell videos. Around 9:15 a.m., on the day of the murder, a man wearing a gray hoodie and carrying a backpack was seen entering Christina's home. Just 12 minutes later, at 9:27 a.m., the same man exited the house on a bicycle. A minute after that, he was spotted riding near 207 Saratoga Drive, about 0.4 miles from the scene. As detectives canvassed the area, a man named Michael came forward. He said he had worked for John Mello, as had another man, Zachary Hughes. Police ran Zachary's license and traced a truck registered to him. Flock camera footage showed this same truck carrying a bicycle on the day before and after the murder. The bicycle matched the one seen in the surveillance footage. Zachary Hughes lived nearby on Tyndall Avenue, within the city limits of Greenville. What particularly stood out to investigators was just how close he was to Mello. Hughes served as Mello's primary point of contact, even while Mello was incarcerated. Mello had recorded a video authorizing Zachary to retrieve his luggage from the Charlotte airport, and over 1,700 messages between them were exchanged via WhatsApp, some intentionally encrypted or scrambled. Zachary was also deeply involved in the custody battle between Mello and Christina. On November 3rd, Hughes was arrested and charged with multiple crimes: murder, conspiracy, first-degree burglary, harassment, and possession of a weapon during a violent crime. But Zachary Hughes was no typical criminal. His background defied all expectations. Born in Morro Bay, California, his family later moved to Virginia, where they upheld strong Christian values centered on family and child welfare. Zachary had a younger brother named Eli, and his parents went on to adopt 5 Russian orphans children who would otherwise have faced institutionalization. However, one of these adopted children, the eldest sister, would profoundly impact Zachary's worldview. According to him, she was the most malevolent person he had ever encountered. She entered the family at age 10, and while the Russian government had provided little background, it quickly became apparent that she had deep psychological issues. Zachary described her as an affectionless psychopath, someone with no moral compass, who lied and manipulated with ease and cold precision. She crafted disturbing stories, showed no empathy, and weaponized emotional displays to control others. Even after being caught in lies or hurtful acts, she would fake remorse, cry for sympathy, and beg for forgiveness only to betray trust again, even more cruelly. Her behavior fractured their home and strained relationships between family members. Zachary said it was like having a vampire in the house, someone who sucked out the goodness of others. Eventually, after finding a disturbing diary where she fantasized about killing their parents to become the rightful queen of the country, the family called social services to have her removed. This traumatic experience left a deep impression on Zachary. It shaped how he perceived people like Christina Parcell, people he believed to be dangerously manipulative and remorseless. He admitted that his hatred of Christina was driven by the parallels he saw between her and his adopted sister. To cope with the chaos of his childhood, Zachary turned to music. He found solace in playing the piano, dedicating himself to the craft with intense focus. His talent paid off. While in high school, he won first place at the Southeastern Piano Festival, earning a solo performance with the South Carolina Philharmonic Orchestra. In 2010, his skill earned him a place at the prestigious Juilliard School, where he excelled both academically and socially. In 2020, Zachary celebrated the 250th birthday of Ludwig van Beethoven with one of the most challenging accomplishments for any pianists: a full performance of all 32 of Beethoven's piano sonatas. Zachary Hughes graduated from the Juilliard School in 2015 and quickly secured a prestigious position as principal keyboardist for the Knoxville Symphony Orchestra. However, just 2 years later, in 2017, he walked away from his musical career to enlist in the United States Marine Corps. His decision was rooted in a deep sense of duty. It was always something I was interested in, the idea of serving others, Zach said. I felt like I owed a debt to my country. I also wanted to experience a tough training environment, and the Marines had the reputation for being the hardest, so that's where I went. Though he was offered a spot in the elite Marine Corps band, Zach declined any special treatment. Instead, he chose to take the more grueling path by entering the Officer Candidates School, OCS, which requires a competitive selection process. Aspiring officers are guided by an Officer Selection Officer, OSO, who trains and evaluates them in preparation for review by a military board, while living in Tennessee. Zach spent months training with his OSO and ultimately earned an invitation to OCS. He excelled in physical evaluations. The physical fitness test PFT consists of 3 parts: pull-ups to failure, maximum crunches in 2 minutes, and a timed 3-mile run. The maximum score is 300 to 100 points in each category. I scored at 294. Throughout his time in OCS, Zach consistently ranked in the top 3% of his class. However, after the 3rd week, he was medically dropped due to level 3 stress fractures in both tibias. At the time I was discharged, I was in the top 3% out of more than 400 candidates, he said. The commanding officer at Quantico, home of the Marine Corps OCS, encouraged him to recover and return. It was during this transitional period in his life that Zach met John Mello. Notably, Zach had no personal connection to Christina Parcell or Bradley Post. He had never met them. Yet, his eventual entanglement in their lives would change everything and divide public opinion. Some see Zach as a man of honor who stepped up when the system failed. Others view him as a cold-blooded killer. But one fact remains beyond dispute. The system did not properly investigate or protect A.M., Christina Parcell's daughter, from abuse. Zachary's trial began on February 10, 2025. Many consider it controversial and biased. The presiding judge ruled that all evidence of alleged abuse was inadmissible. The prosecution portrayed Zach as acting with malice, ignoring what many believe was the core of his motivation. Even if the allegations were unproven, if Zach genuinely believed them to be true, it challenges the notion that his actions stemmed from hatred alone. I'm presenting information here that the jury was never allowed to hear. Zach first met John Mello in 2020 while performing downtown. John and his daughter approached him and asked if he could play Claire de Lune. That brief encounter left a lasting impression. She was special, really mature for her age, articulate, confident, well-traveled. She talked about trips she had taken with her dad. It was clear she was loved and well cared for. From that point on, Zach and John became close. In early October 2020, they celebrated Zach's birthday together. But during the celebration, Zach noticed John's mood shift. Toward the end of the evening, John opened up about his concerns for A.M., who was on a trip with her mother. He began describing Christina Parcell's personality in alarming detail. Zach was skeptical at first. John had a tendency to exaggerate. But as he listened, he was struck by how closely John's description matched that of his own adopted sister, Grace. John kept saying, "Zach, I know this sounds overblown. You probably think I'm exaggerating. And under normal circumstances, I would have thought that, but everything he described about Christina was identical to what I experienced with Grace." Zach's adopted sister had once been removed from the family home after they discovered her diary. In it, she wrote about gouging out their parents' eyes and becoming the rightful queen of the country. Zach had lived through that darkness firsthand: manipulation, charm used as a weapon, and affection weaponized for control. When John described Christina, Zach recognized the pattern instantly. He said she was manipulative, a compulsive liar, charming, lazy, but cunning. She could destroy trust and still pull people back in. This convinced Zach that John was telling the truth, or at the very least, that he believed what he was saying. Over time, even after John moved to Italy, the two stayed in contact. Zach believed AM was a gifted child, and he felt protective of her. He began noticing a change in her demeanor after visits with her mother. I started to think Christina wasn't just toxic. I believed she was dangerous, and I feared that AM would become like her if left in her care. John took AM to Italy on October 4, 2020. Christina responded by filing a motion claiming her visitation rights had been violated. On March 31, 2021, John was found in contempt, and custody proceedings shifted in Christina's favor. In April, she moved into a house on Cabretta Drive with her sister. A month later, Italy ordered the child returned to the U.S., and Christina traveled overseas to bring her home. During this time, John began asking Zach for help, specifically to dig up and circulate information about Christina. He sent me 3 key sets of materials. First, a series of explicit photographs. He told me these were ads from her time working as an escort. They weren't personal or romantic photos, they were lewd and clearly commercial. Zach also received a deposition from Christina, taken in 2016, in which she admitted to having starred in a pornographic film in South Carolina. In the same deposition, she discussed her history of using men for money and sex in exchange for financial support. She spoke frankly about her lack of interest in children at that time, explaining why she had given up custody. She described a transactional mindset around relationships. That deposition was very revealing. He was also sent a 2016 court document in which Christina invoked her Fifth Amendment rights when asked about prostitution-related activity. On May 16, John sent Zach more images, nude photographs of Christina under the alias Caroline Warren, which she allegedly used in online advertisements for sexual services. One of the materials included an affidavit from a firefighter named Alex, who had responded to John's Craigslist ad, seeking testimony about Christina's past. A man identified a woman named Christina Lorraine Purcell, also known as Caroline Warren, by providing photos of her in relation to a Craigslist advertisement. He claimed Christina had offered him sexual services in exchange for money, and, when he refused, she later attempted to entice him with drugs. In the same month, Zach visited John Mello in Italy. When you arrived in Italy, where did you stay? I stayed at John Mello's apartment, Zach responded. He explained that during this visit, Mello often had video calls ordered by the Guardian ad litem. Zach was able to see the calls on Mello's phone or computer. On one such occasion, he even greeted the little girl on the screen. For weeks, John Mello had been telling Zach, "Christina is killing my little girl. I can see the spark dying in her eyes." Initially, Zach thought Mello was being dramatic. He hadn't yet seen the child for himself. But when he finally did, during one of the visits, his perspective changed. The girl he had once met in Greenville was unrecognizable. She had gained about 20 pounds, roughly a quarter of her body weight, which is significant for an 8-year-old. But more than the physical changes, it was her demeanor that struck Zach. The once lively, spunky child had become morose and withdrawn. She seemed depressed and emotionally crushed. Whenever John asked how she was doing, she'd put on a brave face, forcing a smile, and replying, "I'm fine, Daddy." But Zach could tell she was faking it, trying not to worry her father. He recognized that behavior from his own past, with his older sibling, Grace. He believed the girl was internalizing pain far too great for someone her age. Despite her efforts to be strong, Zach could see she was struggling, drowning, as he put it, and for the first time, he understood what John meant about the light in her eyes fading. When Zach returned to the U.S., he began harassing Christina. He distributed explicit photos of her to multiple places: her workplace, Norris Financial, her neighbors, her fiancé Bradley Post, and a local bar the couple frequented. He admitted this publicly available content was sent for a threefold reason: to warn parents in the neighborhood that their children weren't safe around Christina or Bradley, to make sure that individuals like law enforcement and child welfare. Officials had access to what he believed was clear evidence of Christina being a danger to children, including her own daughter, to apply social pressure on Christina. Zach believed that both Christina and Grace maintained false public facades as part of their narcissistic personalities. He hoped public exposure would force Christina to back down from seeking custody of her daughter. In September, 1 month before the murder, Zach called Child Protective Services. He admitted under oath that he had fabricated parts of the report just to get their attention, in hopes they would investigate Christina and Bradley. It's unknown whether an actual investigation followed. Around that same time, John described a disturbing phone call to Zach. Christina had grabbed the phone, turned it toward her face, a rare move for her, hand made a throat-slitting gesture. According to John, this was the angriest he'd ever seen her. Normally calm and composed, Christina had let her mask slip. John told Zach he believed Bradley Post was a pedophile. He even forwarded an email from a contact in the biker community, stating that Bradley had allegedly been trying to pay someone to put the hurt on John Mello. He was reportedly offering large sums of money to get it done. Then, John Mello turned to Zach with a horrifying proposition. He first asked if Zach would be willing to kill Christina Purcell for $5,000 if he truly believed his daughter's life was in danger. Zach said he was shocked and immediately declined. John later upped the offer to $10,000. Zach again refused and told him he was deeply insulted. He told John that the only reason he would ever consider such an act was if he genuinely believed Christina posed an imminent and irreversible threat to the child, and that eliminating her was the only option left. Zach later reflected on how his isolated, homeschooled upbringing may have made him more vulnerable to Mello's influence. In his testimony, he consistently framed Christina as a dangerous and immoral woman, similar to the way he described his oldest sibling. The defense painted him as someone who saw no other option, that his actions were born out of desperation to save an innocent child after all else had failed. During trial footage and testimony clips, many commenters online expressed sympathy for Zach's position. But there is another side to this. Case a woman was murdered in her own home. While Christina may have had flaws, did she really deserve to die? Zach described an intense internal struggle in the weeks leading up to the crime. He agonized over the moral implications. He said, "By the time October 13th came, I had been grappling with this for a long time. I was consumed by guilt for not having acted sooner. I was about to leave the country on a cruise ship job to perform music for wealthy tourists in the South Pacific. But I knew I couldn't just go enjoy that life, knowing that I was leaving a child behind to drown." He insisted this was not about revenge or hate. He wasn't angry. He said he felt nothing that day but pity. He planned everything carefully to ensure Christina would be home alone, not Bradley, not the daughter. He believed that failure would not only put the child at greater risk, but would also expose John Mello to danger. Zach genuinely thought John was a good father and the girl's only chance at a safe, happy life. "I knew it was right logically," Zach said, "but emotionally, it was devastating." Zach described the emotional torment he felt as he drove toward Christina's home on the day of the murder. Overwhelmed by stress, his hands trembled. He was drenched in cold sweat, and he nearly had to pull over multiple times. Despite his physical and emotional breakdown, he kept reminding himself that if he didn't act, no one would save the little girl he believed was in danger. He described being raised to protect women, and how the thought of hurting one was deeply disturbing. Still, he convinced himself that this was his moral duty, something awful, but necessary. As he arrived at the house, he wore dark clothing, gloves, a mask, and carried a gift-wrapped box hiding a revolver, along with a bouquet of roses. His original plan was to use the gun, but upon testing it days before, he realized it was too loud and might attract attention. Instead, he decided to try to knock her unconscious. His intention, he claimed, was not to cause unnecessary pain, but to neutralize her quietly. However, his body betrayed him. When he tried to strike her, his hand faltered. He couldn't bring himself to hit her with full force, and when he tried again, he pulled the blow once more. Christina realized he was hesitating and began to resist. As the situation spiraled out of control, Zach said he was forced to escalate. He took out a knife and attempted to use it, but his strikes were again weak and ineffective. It became a physical struggle. Eventually, they both fell to the floor. He claimed he dissociated, mechanically continuing the assault until she stopped moving. Once the struggle was over, he said he stood in a daze, panicked, trying to clean the scene. He moved her body out of view from the front door, tried to remove evidence of his presence, including wiping her hands with paint thinner to eliminate potential DNA, and changed clothes to avoid detection. However, DNA was later found under Christina's fingernails, linking him to the crime. Despite these efforts, Zach said he prayed before leaving, asking God to let him face the consequences if it was meant to be, and vowed to take responsibility if caught. He then biked back to his truck and returned to the mountains, relieved that he believed the child was now safe. But the jury never saw his full testimony. They were removed from the courtroom during significant portions. In the end, jurors said, the parts they did witness made things worse for the defense. They perceived Zach not as a reluctant savior, but as a cold, calculated, and remorseless killer. The prosecution's case for malice may have been weak on its own, but Zachary Hughes's words strengthened it considerably. It's not just that. She was immoral. She was immoral, Hughes told the jury. She was dead inside, a master manipulator and deceiver. She could lie at the drop of a hat. His testimony painted a clear picture of his motivations. I realized the incredible danger that Christina Parcell posed. She was a glimpse into what our child's future could look like if she remained in her custody, and the facts have proven I was right. That same day, at 1:30 p.m., John Mello was arrested for orchestrating Christina Parcell's murder and allegedly offering Zach money twice to carry it out. Mello was denied bond later that day, with the judge ruling that another court would take up the matter within 30 days. During the bond hearing, the judge turned to someone in the courtroom. It's my understanding that Tina Parcell is here. Tina, as I understand it, you are the sister of the victim. Is that correct, ma'am? Would you like to address the court in reference to this proceeding? Christina's sister Tina then stood up and made an emotional statement, clutching the urn that held Christina's ashes. I brought Christina because she deserves to be here. We've waited 1,224 days for this moment, and I wish I could say it felt good, John, but it doesn't. Not yet. You did this to your family. Your child needs to know that. You did this to her family. I don't know where I'll be when your trial happens, but I promise you this. If I am able, I'll be in that courtroom. And when you're convicted, I will be there at every parole hearing, every one. You will never get rid of me, and that is your own fault. You did this to yourself. Zach Hughes had previously told his psychiatrist that he didn't want his daughter staying with her aunt because he suspected she was secretly photographing the girl while she was undressed. However, those allegations remain unproven. Zach also confessed something else. Yes, I made a call to Child Protective Services. I pretended to be a neighbor. I told them I'd witnessed my daughter's aunt being verbally and physically abusive toward her. That was a lie. I made it up. But I did it to give my daughter a chance to speak to someone from DSS in person and away from her mother so she could tell them her mother was sexually abusing her. Eventually, the verdict was read aloud in court as to the charge of murder. Guilty. As to the charge of possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime. Guilty. As to the charge of first-degree burglary. Guilty. As to the charge of first-degree harassment. Guilty as to the charge of second-degree harassment. Not guilty as to the charge of conspiracy to commit first-degree harassment. Guilty as to the charge of conspiracy to commit second-degree harassment. Not guilty. Signed by the jury foreperson. The prosecution argued Hughes had every intention of killing someone. He was handed a targeton, a silver platter. He was given an address, a date, a time, and he planned it. He planned it down to the last detail, because he believed that if he got everything just right, he'd never get caught. And even if he did get caught, he thought, no problem, I've got a way out. That's not a man with remorse. That's not someone capable of rehabilitation. This is someone who would absolutely do it again to see if he could pull it off. You're left with two choices. Either he's a weak man, easily manipulated into committing murder, or he isn't. And if he isn't, then it means he made a cold, calculated decision and he'll do it again just to see if he can beat the system. Tina, Christina's sister, added, all of these men used my sister. John Mello used her to start a whole new family when he already had a wife and children. Brad Post used her. This defendant used her. They all used her for their own twisted personal gratification. He would do it again without remorse, without rehabilitation. There will be recidivism. The very next day, February 20th, 2025, Zachary Hughes was sentenced to life in prison. His attorney has since filed an appeal. One juror later revealed that if the full details of the abuse allegations and Zach's true motives had been presented, it definitely would have impacted the jury's decision. He went as far as to call the entire trial a mistrial due to the restrictions and exclusions imposed by the judge. Now, back to 1977. At that time, the town had a population of just over 6,500 residents. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Life was slow-paced and peaceful, the way only small towns can be. That close-knit feeling might seem like a minor detail, but trust me, it would soon become painfully significant. Let's talk about the Beatty family. This wasn't your typical household. 10 people lived under one roof. At the helm were 29-year-old Cheryl Beatty and her husband Frederick. They had 7 children, ranging from toddlers to preteens. 12-year-old Frederick Jr., 2-year-old Sharon Lee, 9-year-old Deborah, 8-year-old Paul, 6-year-old Rod, 5-year-old Holly Lynn, 4-year-old Mary Louise. If that weren't enough, their 6-year-old niece, Jennifer Santoro, also lived with them. With so many young children in the home, things were bound to be chaotic, but also full of life, laughter, and love. The Beattys weren't wealthy, but they were grateful for what they had. They made it work, building a warm, loving household. On the evening of Thursday, July 21st, 1977, all 8 children were out enjoying the summer weather. They were swimming and playing in a neighbor's pool in Prospect, Connecticut. Cheryl watched from nearby, making sure they were safe. Meanwhile, Frederick Sr. was working the night shift at Pratt & Whitney, doing what he could to support his family. During that evening, a man arrived at the pool. He wasn't a stranger to the kids, recognized him immediately. They rushed over, showering him with hugs and smiles. The neighbor watching the kids noted how excited they were to see him. Whoever he was clearly someone they trusted. After the swim, the kids left with him and headed home. The neighbor returned to their own evening, unaware that a tragedy was just hours away. At around 4:15 a.m., the quiet night was pierced by the scent of smoke. At first, neighbors assumed someone was burning leaves or trash, but then came something far more chilling: screams. Realizing something was terribly wrong, they called 911. Fire trucks from both Prospect and nearby Bethany raced to the scene. It took firefighters roughly 30 minutes to control the blaze. But what they found afterward was beyond comprehension. Inside the Beatty home, they discovered a massacre. The bodies of Cheryl, her 7 children, and her niece, Jennifer Santoro, were scattered throughout the house. Each had been brutally murdered before the fire was set. Cheryl's charred body lay in the kitchen. 3 children were found in one bedroom, 2 in another, 1 in the master bedroom, and 2 in the bathroom. Many had their hands tied behind their backs. 2 had their feet bound. All showed signs of blunt force trauma to the head. A savage, prelude to the fire that followed. The violence was unimaginable. State Police Commissioner Edward P. Leonard, who was present, described the scene with a few haunting words. All of the bodies were burned extensively, but even those words failed to capture the true horror that unfolded inside that house. But some neighbors, even after waking up to the smell of smoke, didn't think much of it at first. It wasn't until they heard horrifying screams coming from the Beatty home that the reality set in. Something was terribly wrong. That's when they called 911. One neighbor, Joseph Poino, rushed to help. He ran to the house and tried to get inside, but the fire was already raging. I opened the back door, he later recalled, and a blast of heat knocked me back. Then, the picture window exploded. As mentioned earlier, Frederick Beatty, the father, was working the night shift at the Pratt & Whitney factory in North Haven. Around 5:30 a.m., police officers showed up at his workplace. They didn't tell him what had happened, only that he needed to come with them. They took him to his mother's house, where the family's pastor, Reverend Joseph Donnelly, was waiting to break the devastating news. Frederick turned to the Reverend and asked a question no one should ever have to. "Are they all dead?" The Reverend's solemn nod confirmed the unthinkable. In a single night, Frederick had lost everything: his wife, his children, his entire family. Grief-stricken, he reportedly told the Reverend, "There's only one thing left to do. See the bastard pay?" While Frederick was reeling from the tragedy, investigators were already hard at work. They established a command post at Prospect Town Hall and began stopping every car along Route 68, determined to find answers. At the same time, police combed through the Beatty home for clues. That's when they noticed something odd. All the doors and windows were locked from the inside. It raised a chilling question. How did the killer get out? The locked doors pointed to one disturbing possibility. The murderer may have already been inside the house, or somehow locked it behind them after the crime. Naturally, investigators started speaking with neighbors. That's when they learned about Lauren Allen, a man who had been seen at the neighbor's pool earlier that evening with the Beatty children, and again, the next morning, sitting alone in a black sedan in the parking lot of a nearby church. Who was this man, and what was his connection to the family? It didn't take long for the pieces to fall into place. Neighbors revealed that Lauren wasn't just some acquaintance. He had lived in the Beatty family's basement for about 2 years before suddenly disappearing. And now, out of nowhere, he had reappeared on the same night of the horrific crime. Investigators didn't rule anyone out, including Frederick himself. As standard procedure, they asked to search his truck. He agreed immediately. The search turned up nothing suspicious, helping to clear him from suspicion. Within 24 hours, police had spoken to over 100 witnesses, including both Frederick and Lauren. But when they ran Lauren Allen's name through their system, the results were deeply troubling. His criminal record wasn't minor. It revealed a disturbing pattern of behavior. In April 1974, Lauren had been sentenced to prison for larceny. He served less than a year and was released in February 1975. But just a month later, in March 1976, he attempted to escape custody, a desperate act that exposed his recklessness. He was paroled in September 1976, just 7 months before the tragedy at the Beatty home. The timing was suspicious, to say the least. Why had Lauren returned after so long? Why was he spotted near the house in the early hours after the murders? Then came an unexpected twist. Lauren wasn't just some former house guest. He was Frederick's foster brother. On the morning of July 22nd, around 9:30 a.m., detectives went to Lauren's apartment and asked him to come in for questioning. To their surprise, he agreed without resistance. At the station, what unfolded next stunned everyone. Lauren confessed. And not just a vague confession. He provided a detailed, chilling account of the crime. He admitted to attacking Cheryl and the children. To ensure his story checked out, detectives questioned him multiple times. Each time, His answers were consistent. Even when they brought in his psychiatrist, Lauren didn't waver. At this point, it was clear Lauren Allen was responsible. He was arrested and charged with 9 counts of murder and 1 count of arson. To cement the case, detectives had him write a full, 7-page written confession detailing every step of what he had done. Details only the killer could have known. But that wasn't all. The following day, on July 23rd, investigators made another discovery. A trash bag filled with bloody clothes was found near Lauren's driveway. In his car trunk, they found more damning evidence: bloody shoes and socks. It was the same black sedan he'd been seen in the morning after the crime. Everything matched his confession. With overwhelming evidence, you'd think the case was closed, but it wasn't. Not yet. Lauren's defense team wasn't giving up. They pushed for a delay in the trial, arguing that the court had overstepped by taking a blood sample from Lauren without sufficient cause. They attempted to have both the blood evidence and the confession thrown out. They even tried to introduce alternate theories, including the possibility that Cheryl's brother might be the real killer. But the court wasn't swayed. The trial proceeded, and on July 16, 1979, the jury was sworn in. Soon after, Lauren's confession was publicly revealed in court, a moment that shocked everyone. He described how, on the evening of the murders, he picked raspberries with the children. Then he left only to return between 2 and 3 a.m. through the unlocked basement door. He turned on the kitchen light. Cheryl came downstairs, surprised but not alarmed. When he asked to grab tools from the basement to fix his car, she agreed. But when she turned her back to get him a beer, he struck her on the head with a lug wrench, again and again. The most haunting part: he claimed she never screamed. Was she trying to protect her children, hoping to survive by staying quiet? Tragically, her silence didn't stop the attack. One of the children heard the noise and came into the kitchen only to be struck with the same wrench. Lauren continued attacking the others, using both the wrench and a tire iron. When he later heard Cheryl moaning in the kitchen, still alive, he returned and began stabbing her. He later told police he tied up some of the children. Exposure to suffering and death had deeply shaped him, leaving marks that would become increasingly evident in the years ahead. In October 1926, Buck Ruxton gave up his military commission, walking away from a career in military medicine to pursue other opportunities. Earlier, in May 1925, Ruxton had entered into an arranged marriage with a Parsi woman named Maijandri Gali. The union, however, was short-lived and ultimately failed, with financial support from his family and the Bombay Medical Service. Ruxton relocated to Britain in 1926. There, he enrolled in medical courses at London's University College Hospital, registering under the name Gabriel Hakim. He later moved to Edinburgh in 1927 to pursue a fellowship with the Royal College of Surgeons. Though he failed his entrance examination, the General Medical Council permitted him to practice medicine in the UK based on his Bombay qualifications. Soon after, he legally changed his name via deed poll to Buck Ruxton. While studying in Edinburgh, Ruxton met a 26-year-old woman named Isabella Vanis Kerr, who managed a local cafe. Isabella had previously been briefly married to a Dutchman in 1919, but the marriage lasted only a few weeks. She had since resumed her maiden name. Ruxton and Isabella slowly grew close, and their relationship blossomed. In 1928, Isabella accompanied Ruxton to England, where he worked as a locum for a London-based doctor named Manik Myfram, a fellow Parsi. Later, Ruxton became an assistant to Dr. B.R. Reigate, based in Stapingly. During this relocation, Isabella was already pregnant. In 1929, she gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth. Outwardly, the family appeared stable, but behind closed doors, Ruxton's aggressive and controlling nature began to surface. His jealousy and paranoia steadily intensified, and before long, he began unleashing terrifying fits of rage. What should have been a loving home became a prison for Isabella I, filled with fear and emotional turmoil. Their arguments grew more volatile. Police were called to their residence multiple times, only for Isabella to return to him after his desperate, tearful pleas for forgiveness. Despite several attempts to leave, including one trip to Edinburgh with the children, Ruxton always managed to pull her back in, swearing he would change. In 1932, Isabella made a harrowing attempt to take her own life through gas asphyxiation. She nearly died and suffered a miscarriage as a result. Still, she remained in the toxic cycle, manipulated by a man who knew how to bend words into weapons and twist promises into chains. Police grew familiar with the Ruxton household due to the repeated disturbances. During one such incident, Ruxton told an officer, "I feel like murdering two persons. My wife is going out to meet a man." In early September 1935, Isabella traveled to Edinburgh to visit her sister, accompanied by the Edmondson family, close acquaintances of the Ruxton. Ruxton did not go, claiming he was too busy with work. But in his mind, the trip confirmed his worst suspicions. He believed Isabella was having an affair with Robert Edmondson, a young assistant editor at the local town hall. Consumed by jealousy, Ruxton became increasingly unhinged. By the time Isabella returned, he had already decided her fate. On the night of September 14, 1935, Isabella left to visit her sisters in Blackpool and view the famed Blackpool illuminations. She returned home around midnight. That night, Ruxton's paranoia erupted. He accused her of infidelity. Isabella panicked and tried to flee, but it was too late. In a frenzy, Ruxton attacked her, perhaps beginning with his hands around her throat, squeezing the breath from her lungs. Did she lose consciousness or die in that terrible embrace? We may never know. But strangulation alone wasn't enough. His fury demanded more. He beat her savagely, shattering the delicate bones in her face. Then came the blade-cold final. He stabbed her, letting her life spill onto the floor. But someone had seen too much. Mary Jane Rogerson, their live-in maid, was likely a witness. Perhaps she heard the struggle and entered the room. Perhaps she was already there. Maybe she screamed. Maybe she tried to run, but Ruxton couldn't let her live. His wrath turned toward her with equal savagery. Did she plead for her life? It made no difference. He rained blows upon her, her skull fractured. She might have cried out once, just once, before he strangled her too. Her fingers clawed helplessly at his skin. Her final breath was choked into silence. And then, again, the knife, whether to ensure death or simply because he had lost all control, we do not know. When the violence ended, both women lay lifeless. Their blood soaked the home. Yet Ruxton's madness was not over. He had prepared for this. Before the murders, he had told both his charwomen not to come to the house until Monday, ensuring no one would arrive too early and discover what he had done. He then set to work covering his tracks. Using his medical training, Ruxton dismembered the bodies. Blood pooled across the house, on the stairs, on the walls. He removed carpets and burned towels in the garden to eliminate evidence. The next morning, he dropped his children off at a friend's house, then returned to clean the crime scene. Later, he enlisted a patient and her husband under the guise of preparing the house for redecorators. When Mrs. Hampshire arrived at the house in Dalton Square, she immediately sensed something was wrong. Blood-stained carpet, a locked room with straw sticking out from underneath the door, and Ruxton's suit saturated in blood. He handed her his blood-stained suit and stair carpeting and asked her to have them cleaned. He thought he had covered every trace, until a stranger stumbled upon the unimaginable. On the morning of September 29, 1935, Susan Haynes Johnson was walking near an old stone bridge about 2 miles north of Moffat, a quiet market town in Dumfriesshire, Scotland. The countryside was peaceful, the river flowing beneath the bridge, the hills misty with early morning fog, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth. As Susan leaned over the bridge to take in the view, something caught her eye, a dark, misshapen bundle was wedged against a boulder in the rushing water. At first, she thought it was a discarded sack or rubbish, but something about the way it clung to the rocks unsettled her. A terrible sense of dread filled her. Drawn by a mix of fear and curiosity, she stepped closer. The fabric was soaked through, tightly wrapped around something inside. Then she an arm, swollen and partially decomposed, protruding from the bundle. The fingers curled unnaturally, as if reaching for something beyond the grave. Susan stumbled back in horror. Her heart thundered in her chest, her breath caught in her throat. The exposed flesh was gray and bloated, the skin slashed with chilling precision. A deep, bone-chilling sense of terror crept up her spine. Someone hadn't just killed these people. Someone had mutilated them, with surgical skill. Her scream shattered the stillness of the morning. What had begun as an ordinary, even pleasant, day for Susan quickly unraveled into something nightmarish, a day that would revisit her in dreams for the rest of her life. The gruesome discovery at the garden home Lynn shook all of Scotland. The Dumfries constabulary, faced with a crime of unprecedented brutality, recognized they were out of their depth. They immediately called in reinforcements, and by the next day, Detective Lieutenant William Ying and Detective Lieutenant Bertie Hammond arrived from Glasgow to assist with the case in Moffat. What they encountered was beyond imagination. Bodies so severely mutilated and dismembered that determining even the sex of the victims was initially impossible. Nearly every identifying feature had been destroyed. The killer had taken every step to ensure that dental records and fingerprints could not be used to identify the corpses. But even the most meticulous murderers make mistakes. While reviewing local cases back at Dumfries, Detective Ying came across a newspaper article describing the recent disappearance of 2 women from Lancaster, England. Something about their descriptions gave him pause. One of the missing women matched the height and build of one of the bodies recovered from the River Annan. Ying trusted his instincts, and as he pursued the lead, the evidence began to mount. Among the dismembered remains, investigators found a telling clue: fragments of newspaper that had been used to wrap parts of the bodies. At first, this seemed insignificant until they identified the paper as a specific edition of the Sunday Graphic, a national paper that, in this case, had only been distributed in the Lancaster area. The horror that had begun in Scotland now had ties to England. But another, even more chilling detail began to emerge: the way the bodies had been dismembered. This wasn't the result of a frenzied or impulsive attack. The cuts were deliberate, the removal of identifying features meticulous. This was the work of someone with a deep, professional understanding of human anatomy, a surgeon. As the detectives delved deeper into the Lancaster disappearances, 2 names surfaced: Isabella Ruxton, wife of a well-known physician, Dr. Buck Ruxton, and Mary Rogerson, the family's maid. Both had vanished under suspicious circumstances. The correlation was too strong to ignore, with 2 mutilated, unclaimed bodies found hundreds of miles away, and Ruxton's wife and maid missing. The police turned their attention to Dr. Ruxton, a man once praised for his surgical precision, but whispered about for his jealous rages and volatility. Police arrested Dr. Ruxton and were granted full access to his home in Lancaster's Dolphin Square. There, they found signs of a botched attempt to clean up a horrific crime scene. Bloodstains, some faint and others still vividly visible, marked the stair carpet, the bathroom floor, and other surfaces. Despite a thorough scrubbing effort, forensic science revealed the truth beneath the bleach. But the real breakthrough came through fingerprints. Investigators knew if they could find even one print from the victims inside the house, it would prove they had died there. The killer had removed Isabella Ruxton's fingertips, ensuring her hands could never speak. But he had failed to do the same with Mary Rogerson. Her fingers remained intact. Detectives Bertie Hammond and Sergeant Duncan launched a painstaking examination of the home, from attic lampshades to medicine bottles in the cellar. They dusted everything. Hundreds of fingerprints surfaced, but It was a single palm print in the bathroom that sealed Dr. Ruxton's fate. The print matched Mary Rogerson's. She had been there. She had died there. And so had Isabella. The final and most damning piece of evidence came from Professor John Glaister, the forensic pathologist overseeing the post-mortem. Traditional identification methods were useless due to the extreme disfigurement. But Glaister had another tool: X-ray imaging. He superimposed radiographs of the victims' skulls over old photographs of Isabella Ruxton. The jawline, skull shape, and bone structure matched perfectly. There was no longer any doubt. The remains found near the River Lynn belonged to Isabella Ruxton and Mary Rogerson, and their killer was Dr. Buck Ruxton. The case would go down in history as one of Britain's most significant forensic milestones, a battle of science against savagery. Dr. Ruxton had believed he was untouchable, so methodical in his dismemberment that no one could possibly reassemble the truth. But he was wrong. The river didn't wash away his crimes. The newspapers he used to conceal the remains ultimately betrayed him, and the dead, through their fingerprints and bones, spoke louder than any lie he could tell. The trial of Dr. Buck Ruxton began on March 2, 1936, at Manchester's High Court of Justice. He was charged with the murders of his wife, Isabella, and their maid, Mary Jane Rogerson. The trial drew massive attention, not only because of the shocking brutality of the crime, but also due to the groundbreaking forensic methods used in the investigation. Ruxton pleaded not guilty. His defense, led by Norman Burkett KC, attempted to sow doubt about the identity of the bodies and questioned the source of the bloodstains found in the house. They argued that the forensic evidence was circumstantial at best, but the prosecution, led by Joseph Cooksey, Jackson KC, methodically dismantled those claims. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence: the newspaper wrapping, which linked the bodies to Lancaster; fabric used to wrap the remains, which matched materials found in the Ruxton home; and bloodstain analysis that corresponded to the victims. Ruxton's own behavior, inconsistent stories, evasive answers, and panicked actions painted a picture of guilt. After an 11-day trial, the jury deliberated for just over an hour before returning a unanimous verdict: guilty. Dr. Buck Ruxton was sentenced to death. On May 12, 1936, he was hanged at HM Prison, Manchester. But the story didn't end there. After his execution, a sealed letter written by Ruxton shortly after his arrest was made public. In it, he confessed, "I killed Mrs. Ruxton in a fit of temper because I thought she had been with a man. I was mad at the time. Mary Jane Rogerson was present. I had to kill her." The confession removed any lingering doubt. Dr. Buck Ruxton had not only killed two innocent women, he had mutilated their bodies, attempted to erase their identities, and underestimated the power of science and justice. John Jones of the Austin Police Department in Texas was on duty when a call came in from the dispatch center. Initially, it was reported as a simple fire at a local yogurt shop, but within moments, the situation escalated dramatically. It wasn't just a fire, it was a robbery and a quadruple homicide. When Jones arrived at the scene, what he saw was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The cheerful, family-friendly yogurt shop was now a smoldering shell, thick with smoke and ash. As he moved through the wreckage, his flashlight cut through the haze, revealing a horror that would haunt even the most seasoned investigator. Amid the smoke and scorched walls, 4 charred bodies lay lifeless on the soot-covered floor. All were young girls, each under the age of 18. Their bodies had been burned so severely that they were nearly unrecognizable. Their skin shriveled by the intense heat, limbs twisted from the flames. But Detective Jones quickly realized something chilling. The fire wasn't the cause of death. It had been deliberately set to destroy evidence and conceal something even more sinister. The victims were soon identified. 2 were employees, working the night shift: Eliza Thomas and Jennifer Harbison. The other 2 were Jennifer's sister, Sarah Harbison, and a close friend, Amy Ayers, who had stopped by to wait for the girls to finish work. The scene suggested unimaginable terror in their final moments. The girls had been gagged in tightly, bound using their own clothing, pointing to a level of cruelty meant to strip them of any chance of escape or resistance. But that wasn't all. After murdering the girls, the killer didn't flee immediately. Instead, they set the place ablaze, torching the entire shop, bodies included. The fire raged violently in the confined space, not only severely burning the victims, but also nearly eliminating any physical evidence. When firefighters finally extinguished the flames, every surface was coated in black soot, making it virtually impossible to collect fingerprints. The killer hadn't just been brutal, they had been calculated and methodical. In covering their tracks, autopsies confirmed that all 4 girls had been shot in the head. Investigators noted 2 distinct types of bullets, .380 caliber and .22 caliber, clear evidence that more than one weapon, and likely more than one person, had been involved. Yet despite recovering the bullets, the firearms themselves had completely vanished. With this information, the police issued a nationwide alert, hoping someone might come forward with information about the guns or suspects. The investigation ballooned quickly, eventually expanding to 342 persons of interest. Among them was Morris Pierce, a local teenager arrested just 8 days after the murders at a nearby mall. He was carrying a .22 caliber handgun, the same caliber used in the crime. At first glance, it looked like a major break. Fearing serious charges, Morris pointed the finger at 3 acquaintances, Forrest Welburn, Michael Scott, and Robert Springsteen. He claimed that they were the ones who committed the murders, while he simply acted as their getaway driver. Maurice also insisted that the .22 caliber gun found on him was not the murder weapon. He had allegedly given a different pistol to Forrest on the night of the crime. Intrigued by the lead, detectives arranged for Maurice to make a recorded phone call to Forrest. Their plan was to listen in and catch any hint of a confession or nervous slip-up, but the call didn't go as expected. Forrest sounded confused and unaware of what Morris was even talking about. He appeared genuinely shocked by the accusations. When all 4 teens were brought in for further questioning, each of them flatly denied any involvement in the crime. Their stories were consistent, and none showed signs of deception. More importantly, there was no physical evidence tying any of them to the scene. With nothing solid to go on, police had no choice but to release Morris and his alleged accomplices. Investigators then turned their attention elsewhere. A few local residents displayed suspicious behavior during the ongoing search, and one name continued to surface. Hoping for a breakthrough, police obtained a warrant and raided his home. What they found, however, were rat bones and odd trinkets, nothing that could connect him to the yogurt shop killings. 2 months after the murders, a new suspect came into focus. Multiple witnesses recalled seeing a strange man sitting in a car outside the yogurt shop on the night of the crime. He didn't go inside, nor did he leave. He simply watched, silent and still. Police created a sketch based on witness accounts and distributed it widely through the media. Then, an unexpected link emerged. Investigators from the department's sexual crimes unit were working a separate case involving a kidnapping and sexual assault that occurred 3 weeks before the yogurt shop murders. When they compared suspect sketches, they were shocked. The 2 suspects looked nearly identical. The possibility that the yogurt shop killer might also be a serial predator gave the investigation new momentum. In the fall of 1992, after months of digging, police traced the suspect in the sexual assault case to Mexico. He closely resembled the man in the sketch. When Austin detectives questioned him, he confessed to the kidnapping but denied any involvement in the yogurt shop case. Yet, under questioning by Mexican authorities, the man suddenly reversed his position and admitted to participating in the murders. Mexico's government, however, refused to extradite him and instead announced plans to prosecute him domestically. But cracks quickly formed in his story. The gun he claimed to have used didn't match the ballistic evidence from the scene. His story unraveled, and soon he recanted his entire confession, insisting he hadn't been there that night at all. This became yet another crushing blow to the case. Over the next several years, police received a total of 6 separate confessions from various individuals. Each one, however, was plagued by contradictions or lacked credible evidence. None led to an arrest. By 1994, 3 years after the massacre, Detective John Jones, who had spearheaded the investigation from day one, was reassigned out of the homicide division. The department hoped that bringing in fresh eyes might help uncover clues that had previously been overlooked. Then, in October 1999, nearly a decade after the killings, the Austin police made a surprise announcement. The yogurt shop murder case was being reopened. The yogurt shop murders, breakthroughs, betrayals, and legal reversals, after 8 long years without significant progress. The Austin Police Department stunned the city by announcing that 4 men had been arrested in connection with the notorious 1991 yogurt shop murders. The announcement came during a high-profile press conference, where the mayor of Austin confirmed that the suspects were not new names. Maurice Pierce, Forrest Wellborn, Michael Scott, and Robert Springsteen had all been questioned shortly after the original crime, only to be released due to lack of evidence. At the time of the arrests in 1999, investigators were still without physical evidence, DNA matches, or the murder weapon. However, the breakthrough hinged on confessions obtained from Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen. Michael Scott's statement came after a 20-hour interrogation spread over 4 days. Under intense pressure, he eventually began to recount what had happened inside the yogurt shop that night. According to Michael, the group had only planned a simple robbery, choosing the yogurt shop as their target. But when night fell, something triggered a descent into horror. He described the gunfire as relentless and traumatic, a sound he claimed would haunt him forever. Not long after, Robert Springsteen was brought in for questioning. His story aligned with much of what Michael had said, but he added a deeply disturbing detail. He had sexually assaulted one of the victims before killing her. Still, the case remained riddled with gaps. The lack of corroborating evidence, including missing weapons, no eyewitnesses, and questionable forensics, raised immediate concerns. Robert's lawyer insisted that his confession had been coerced under duress, the result of extended isolation and manipulation. Michael's legal team similarly claimed he had been psychologically terrorized, confessing only to escape the ordeal of interrogation. Despite the contradictions and confessions being later retracted, the legal system moved forward. Forrest Wellborn was never indicted due to insufficient evidence, and Maurice Pierce was released as well. But in 2001, Robert and Michael went to trial separately, with the prosecution leaning heavily on their confessions. The only substantial evidence available, in the absence of physical proof, and despite their retractions, both were convicted. Robert Springsteen was sentenced to death in 2002, and Michael Scott received a sentence of life in prison. However, the case didn't end there. Mounting legal criticism and media attention began to cast doubt over the entire process. By 2006, the Texas Supreme Court agreed to review the case. The turning point came with advanced DNA testing performed on biological samples collected from one of the victims. The result shocked everyone. The DNA did not match any of the 4 original suspects, including both men who had confessed. This revelation completely discredited the confessions, especially since Robert had explicitly claimed to have raped one of the victims. The DNA instead pointed to the terrifying possibility that the real killer had never been arrested. In 2009, all charges against Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott were officially dropped, and both men were released from prison after nearly a decade of incarceration. However, The lack of exoneration meant the charges could, in theory, be reinstated if new evidence emerged. Despite the case growing colder with time, hope remained. In 2017, with the advent of genetic genealogy and improved forensic technologies, Austin police uploaded DNA evidence to public genealogy databases, hoping for a breakthrough, but incomplete data sets prevented a clear match. The yogurt shop murders left a profound impact on both the Austin community and the U.S. justice system. On August 3, 2022, the Victims' Rights Act was signed into law, largely inspired by this case. It allows families of cold case victims to request federal investigators to re-examine their cases using the most advanced forensic methods available. Over 3 decades later, the case remains open, with a lingering promise. Justice may yet be served. Case 8. Clara Suarez, and the murder of David Harris. Clara Suarez was born and raised in Colombia, where she grew up ambitious and determined. With a strong work ethic and dreams of success, she pursued a career in dentistry and eventually immigrated to the United States, settling in Texas. Clara established herself as a respected and skilled dentist. It was there she met David Harris, a charismatic orthodontist known for his charm and warm personality. The two fell in love and got married on February 14, 1992, at the Nassau Bay Hilton, a romantic beginning to what appeared to be a perfect life together. Clara and David built a thriving dental practice in Friendswood, Texas. Their business expanded to multiple offices, generating an annual income of around $650,000, the equivalent of $1.2 million in 2025. They also raised a family, twin sons, Brian and Bradley, born in 1998, and David's teenage daughter, Lindsay, from a previous marriage. Two outsiders, they had it all: a beautiful home, loving children, and successful careers. But beneath the surface, the foundation was crumbling. David had begun to change. He got in shape, spent more time away from home, and started staying late at work. Soon, Clara discovered the painful truth. David was having an affair, not a fleeting one, but a serious relationship with Gail Bridges, a receptionist at their dental office. The signs were not subtle. Gail behaved flirtatiously at work, bending over provocatively, and claiming the front passenger seat in David's vehicle during group outings. Staff members, loyal to Clara, found the behavior inappropriate, and eventually one of them told Clara about the affair. On July 16, 2002, Clara confronted David. Heartbroken and humiliated, she demanded counseling. David apologized and claimed he would end the affair, and Clara, still clinging to hope, fired Gail and launched a campaign to win back her husband's love. Clara got a makeover, joined a gym, hired a personal trainer, and even consulted a plastic surgeon. She bought new lingerie and tried to reshape her personality into what David claimed he found attractive: agreeable, compliant, and docile, just like Gail. But David wasn't done with Gail. He told Clara he needed to meet Gail one last time. To gain closure at dinner, he said. On July 24, 2002, Clara wasn't convinced. She hired a private investigator to follow him, reportedly not only to catch David in a lie, but also to investigate rumors that Gail might be involved with another woman, hoping that could sway David back to her for good. That night, the investigator reported back, David hadn't gone to a restaurant. Instead, he and Gail checked into the Hilton Hotel, the very same hotel where David and Clara had once married. After celebrating their wedding reception, Clara Harris got into her Mercedes, bringing along her 16-year-old stepdaughter, Lindsay. They headed to the Nassau Bay Hilton, where Clara suspected her husband David was staying with his mistress, Gail. When they arrived, they immediately spotted Gail's SUV, visibly recognizable from her previous work at the couple's dental office. Without hesitation, Clara got out and viciously vandalized the vehicle, keying the sides, bending or tearing off the windshield wipers. Then she and Lindsay entered the hotel lobby, searching for the pair. But David and Gail weren't listed as guests. Determined to lure them out, Clara called David and lied, telling him one of their twin sons was sick and he needed to come home. The trap worked. Moments later, David and Gail emerged from the elevator, hand in hand. Enraged, Clara lunged. David managed to shield himself, but Gail wasn't as lucky. Clara grabbed her by the hair and slammed her head onto the marble floor, tearing her blouse. In the process, it took several men to pull Clara off, but not before she slammed Gail's head again. Hotel staff broke up the altercation and escorted Clara and Lindsay back to Clara's Mercedes. David and Gail headed toward Gail's now damaged SUV, but Clara wasn't finished. Behind the wheel, Clara circled the parking lot, fuming. As David walked with Gail, Clara suddenly hit the gas and accelerated toward them. Just before impact, Gail was pushed into the SUV, but Clara struck David at full force. He was launched nearly 25 feet across the lot. At that moment, the private investigator Clara had hired, originally tasked with documenting David's affair, began filming. Clara circled and hit David again, then again. In total, she struck her husband up to 5 times. Some witnesses claimed that during the final reverse impact, she stopped the car on top of him. Then she stepped out, leaned over his body, and sobbed, saying, "David, look what you made me do." All of this happened with 16-year-old Lindsay in the passenger seat, screaming for her stepmother to stop. Horrified bystanders shouted helplessly. David Harris died at the scene. Clara was arrested on the spot but released on bail just 1 day later. Her defense team went to work immediately. The prosecution, however, had compelling evidence: eyewitness testimony, Lindsay's harrowing account, and the chilling video footage. From the outset, the facts weren't in dispute. Clara had killed her husband. The only question was it premeditated murder or a crime of passion? It would take over a year for the case to reach trial. Public opinion was deeply divided. Some sympathized with Clara's emotional devastation, even calling her a wronged woman pushed too far. Others saw her actions as methodical, cold-blooded revenge. In court, Clara faced an uphill battle. She testified that she never meant to hit David. According to her, she only intended to crash into Gail's SUV. She claimed that when she saw David, it was too late to stop. Clara denied running over him multiple times and insisted the bumps seen on video were just from her car hitting a curb, not his body. But the prosecution dismantled her version. The surveillance footage showed the car visibly lifting several times, indicating it had run over a solid object. What's more, just 2 days after the incident and 1 day after posting bond, Clara was recorded during a call with her private investigator. In the audio, she was focused not on the killing, but on whether her actions had been caught on tape. She never once called it an accident. Instead, she asked if the affair footage was enough to warrant a refund, since David was now dead and the job had ended early. Lindsay's courtroom testimony directly contradicted Clara's story. She recalled Clara saying, "I'm going to hit him," just before accelerating. Lindsay described how her father tried to flee and begged Clara to stop. Clara, she said, was relentless. Multiple witnesses echoed Lindsay's account. The hotel manager saw Clara run over David 3 times. The front desk manager recalled 4 times, 3 forward, 1 in reverse. A night manager said 2 times, while 3 tennis players at the scene each testified that Clara ran him over repeatedly. However, the medical examiner's findings introduced doubt. Only 1 clear tire mark was found on David's body. The defense used this to argue she hit him only once. They even brought in a private consultant to recreate the scene and claimed Clara's Mercedes didn't have the turning radius to strike him more than once. In response, the prosecution presented photographic evidence showing a second tire mark and called a police officer who challenged the defense's reconstruction. When confronted with the overlooked tire track directly on David's body, the defense's expert consultant could no longer support their original claim that Clara had only hit him once. The court deemed the defense's accident recreation inadmissible in a last-ditch effort to defend herself. Clara Harris chose to take the stand against the advice of her legal team. That decision quickly backfired because she testified. Her previously inadmissible police interview was now allowed into evidence, but only part of that interview was played. The jury heard Clara say, "I wanted to hurt him," but they never heard her follow-up statement, "I didn't want to kill him." Tension in the courtroom reached a boiling point. At one moment, Clara's own attorney collapsed from the stress and had to be rushed to the hospital. A recess was called. He was later released, but the damage to the defense was done. Ultimately, the prosecution had the most damning piece of evidence: the surveillance video. It clearly showed Clara circling the lot and striking her husband multiple times. They argued that this wasn't an impulsive act of rage, but a cold, calculated murder. In February 2003, Clara Harris was found guilty of killing her husband, David Harris. However, the jury ruled that she had acted under sudden passion, a legal distinction under Texas law. While murder typically carries a sentence of 5 to 99 years, or life, a sudden passion ruling reduces the sentencing range to just 2 to 20 years. Clara received the maximum penalty allowed, 20 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. At first, David's parents, Gerald and Mildred Harris, stood by Clara. They even requested leniency at her trial, hoping the court would consider probation. But after her conviction, that relationship quickly unraveled. A major turning point was custody of Clara and David's twin sons. At sentencing, Clara stunned her in-laws by revealing that she planned to give custody of the boys, not to them but to a trusted neighbor couple. David's parents were blindsided and deeply hurt. Tensions escalated further when Clara inherited a large portion of David's estate estimated to exceed $1 million. His parents believed that money should have gone to their grandchildren, not the woman who killed their son. In response, Gerald and Mildred filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Clara, citing emotional anguish, loss of companionship, and financial dependency. In 2007, a jury awarded them $3.7 million in damages. 3 years earlier, in 2004, Clara filed a lawsuit of her own, this time against her former attorney, George Parnham. She accused him of overcharging her, mismanaging her defense, and prioritizing media attention over her legal outcome. Clara claimed she had paid him more than $235,000, despite an alleged verbal agreement of $75,000. She also said he shared her private financial information with other lawyers without consent. The court sided with Parnham. In 2008, Clara was ordered to pay him over $70,000 in unpaid expenses and nearly $400,000 in legal fees. During her incarceration at the Mountain View Unit in Gatesville, Texas, Clara worked on converting school textbooks into Braille for blind students. Her twin sons, just 4 years old at the time of the killing, were raised by the same neighbors she had entrusted with their care. Clara maintained a close relationship with them, and they visited her about once a month. Clara was denied parole twice before being granted release in November 2017. At age 60, she was freed in May 2018 after serving 15 years of her 20-year sentence. In a 2023 interview, Clara, now almost unrecognizable, spoke quietly about her desire to live a private life, away from media attention and public scrutiny. While she granted a lengthy interview to a reporter, she declined to appear on camera, saying she simply wanted a peaceful, ordinary life. Notably, Clara has never publicly expressed remorse or offered a direct apology, neither in that interview nor at any other time. In the end, Clara Harris was not the first person to be consumed by the rage of betrayal, and she likely won't be the last.